He did not lower his voice. He wanted the sentence to land. My real children will inherit everything. Then the estate lawyer slid a second folder onto the table, one I had never seen before. He quietly said, "Mr. Donnelly, this document only activates if you say that out loud." That was when my sister stopped smiling, and my father went pale. My name is Harper Bell, and I am 34 years old. I was sitting in a high-backed leather chair that was too big for me, in a conference room that smelled of furniture polish and the stale, cloying scent of lilies. That smell had clung to my skin and hair ever since the funeral service ended 2 hours ago. It was the scent of my mother's final pageant, a performance orchestrated entirely by the man sitting at the head of the table. We were on the 4th floor of a brick building in downtown Asheville, North Carolina. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Blue Ridge Mountains were hiding behind a gray curtain of afternoon rain. Inside, the air conditioning was humming a low, expensive note that did nothing to cool the heat rising in my cheeks. Caleb Donnelly sat at the head of the mahogany table. He was the man I had called father for 30 years, ever since he married my mother when I was a toddler. He was wearing a black suit that cost more than my car, and he looked less like a grieving widower and more like a CEO concluding a hostile takeover. He checked his watch, a gold timepiece that caught the dim overhead light, and then he looked at the estate lawyer. He did not lower his voice. He wanted the sentence to land. My real children will inherit everything. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight. Pressing down on the room, it sucked the oxygen out of the air. To my left, Tessa Donnelly shifted in her seat. She was 26, Caleb's golden child, sharp and beautiful in a way that required constant maintenance. She smoothed the skirt of her black dress, and I saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. It was a micro-expression, there and gone in a heartbeat, but I caught it. It was Victory. Beside her, Bryce Donnelly, her twin brother, let out a long theatrical sigh and shook his head, looking down at his hands as if he were pained by his father's bluntness. But Bryce was playing a part. He always did. I saw the way his shoulders relaxed. He had been tense since we walked in, terrified that our mother might have left me a crumb that would diminish his slice of the pie. Now, he knew he was safe. I sat perfectly still. I had spent 3 decades training for this moment. I had practiced my reaction in the mirror of my bathroom apartment 1,000 times. I kept my face blank, my hands folded loosely in my lap, resisting the urge to pick at a loose thread on my jacket. I would not give them the satisfaction of a tear. I would not give them the pleasure of an outburst. I was a guest in this family, just as I had been a guest in their house, and guests are expected to be polite, even when they are being shown the door. Grant Halbrook, the estate lawyer, was a man of indeterminate age with steel-gray hair and spectacles that magnified his unblinking eyes. He did not look at Caleb. He did not look at the twins. He was staring at a point on the table, his fingers resting on the closed file in front of him. Caleb leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. "I think that clarifies things. Grant, the house, the liquid assets, the portfolio, it all stays in the Donnelly line." Lydia understood that. She knew how hard I worked to build this family's security. He said family like it was a brand name. Grant finally moved. He did not open the main file. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, which was sitting on the floor beside him, and pulled out a single, sealed envelope. It was cream-colored, thick, and expensive. On the front, written in blue ink in a handwriting I would recognize anywhere looping, elegant, slightly slanted to the right, was my name, Harper Bell. Grant placed the envelope on the table. He slid it just an inch toward me, then stopped. "Mr. Donnelly," Grant said. His voice graveled and low. "We have not finished the reading." Caleb frowned. The skin between his eyebrows crinkled. He hated deviations from the script. "I have seen the paperwork. Grant, I went through Lydia's filing cabinet myself last week. I saw the draft will from 2010. It is standard. Surviving spouse, then distinct lineage. There is nothing else." "There is," Grant said, But it was not in her filing cabinet, and it is not yours. Caleb slammed his hand on the table. It was a sharp, violent sound that made Bryce jump. I am the executor. I am her husband. Everything she owned is mine to administer. You are the executor of the Donnelly marital assets, Grant corrected him, his tone turning frigid. However, you are not the executor of the Hart family irrevocable trust. Tessa laughed. It was a brittle, sharp sound. The Hart family. You mean Mom's old life? She didn't have anything when she married Dad, just some debt and a beat-up sedan. Grant ignored her. He reached into his briefcase again. This time, he withdrew a thick folder, bound with a red legal cord. He set it down on the table with a heavy thud. The sound was different from the envelope. It sounded dense. It sounded like a weapon. The label on the folder was typed in bold. Black letters. Hart family. Irrevocable trust. Conditional addendum. Caleb stared at the folder. His face had gone from flush to a strange, mottled gray. What is that? This, Grant said, placing his hand flat on the document, is a separate legal entity established by Mrs. Donnelly, Mrs. Hart, as she is referred to in this specific instrument 15 years ago. It operates outside the jurisdiction of your marital estate. 15 years? Caleb narrowed his eyes. Lydia didn't do anything 15 years ago without running it by me. I managed her accounts. I managed everything. She managed to do this, Grant said. He looked up, and for the first time, he looked directly at Caleb. There was no warmth in the lawyer's eyes, only a professional, predatory focus. This document has been dormant. Mr. Donnelly, it contains a very specific activation clause, a trigger. I watched Caleb's throat work as he swallowed. He was trying to calculate, trying to figure out which angle he had missed. What trigger? Grant slid a second, thinner folder out from the main stack. He opened it and turned it around so Caleb could read the header. The assets within this trust, which are substantial, are designated to a primary beneficiary, Grant explained. However, the identity of that beneficiary was made conditional based on the conduct of the surviving spouse immediately following the funeral. That is insane, Bryce sputtered. You cannot condition a will on conduct after death. It is a trust, not a will, Grant shot back, sharp as a whip crack. And you absolutely can condition the disbursement of funds on specific criteria. Mrs. Donnelly was very precise. Grant looked down at the paper. The clause states that if, during the reading of the will or in any formal setting regarding the estate, the surviving spouse, Caleb Donnelly, verbally affirms Harper Bell as his daughter and equal heir, the trust is dissolved and the assets are poured over into the general marital estate, under your control. Caleb's eyes widened. He sat up straighter, a flicker of greed lighting up his face. Well, then, that is fine. We can just... However, Grant interrupted, his voice raising just a decibel, cutting through Caleb's hope like a knife. There is Section B, Grant tapped the page. If the surviving spouse, Caleb Donnelly, verbally excludes Harper Bell, denies her status as his child, or uses specific exclusionary language distinguishing his real children from her, then the conditional addendum activates immediately. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I looked at the cream envelope with my name on it. My mother had known. She had not just suspected. She had known exactly who Caleb was. She had predicted this moment down to the vocabulary he would use. Grant looked at Caleb, his expression unreadable. You just said, and I quote, "My real children will inherit everything." Is that correct? Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Tessa, then at Bryce. He looked back at the lawyer. Panic was starting to bleed through his arrogance. I was speaking generally. I was emotionally distraught. You cannot hold a man to a slip of the tongue on the day of his wife's funeral. It was not a slip of the tongue. Caleb, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hoarse, but steady. It was the first time I had spoken since entering the room. You have said that to me since I was 7 years old. You said it when I graduated. You said it when I moved out. You just wanted to make sure it was on the record today." "Quiet, Harper," Caleb snapped, the reflex to silence me kicking in automatically. He turned his aggression on the lawyer. "This is a trap. It is entrapment. I will contest this. I will have your license. You baited me." "I did not say a word until you finished speaking," Grant said calmly. He reached toward the center of the table, where a small black device sat amidst the water bottles and legal pads. I had thought it was a speakerphone. Grant pressed a button on the device. A red light turned to green. "As per the agreement you all signed upon entering this room to ensure the accuracy of these proceedings," Grant said. "This meeting is being recorded. The timestamp of your statement has been logged. The activation condition has been met. It is irrevocable." Tessa stood up so fast her chair tipped backward and hit the wall with a loud crash. "This is ridiculous. What is in that trust? Mom didn't have any money. She was a housewife. Dad made all the money. This is probably just her jewelry collection and some sentimental trash." Grant looked at Tessa. He did not smile, but there was a distinct lack of patience in his demeanor. "It is not jewelry, Ms. Donnelly." He turned back to Caleb. "Because you have triggered the exclusion clause. The entirety of the Hart family trust now bypasses the marital estate. It bypasses you. It bypasses Tessa and Bryce." Grant picked up the cream envelope, the one with my name on it, and held it out. But he didn't hand it to me yet. He held it in the air. A suspended verdict. "The addendum transfers full control, ownership, and executive power over the assets to the sole remaining beneficiary named in the Hart lineage." Caleb's face was pale, draining of color until he looked like wet chalk. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "How much?" he whispered. "What is she hiding?" Grant ignored him. He turned his body in his chair, angling himself entirely toward me. For the first time in that room, I felt seen, not as an annoyance, not as a charity case, not as the stepdaughter who needed to be managed, but as a person. "Ms. Bell," Grant said softly, "your mother spent the last 15 years building a firewall. She knew she could not protect you while she was alive, not without destroying the peace she thought you needed, so she decided to protect you from the grave." He extended the envelope. I reached out. My hand was trembling. Just a little. I took the envelope. It felt heavy, much heavier than a letter should be. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That contains the keys," Grant said. "Not literally, but effectively." "This is fraud," Caleb shouted. He stood up, towering over the table, his face twisting into a snarl. "Lydia was mentally incompetent. She was sick for years. You manipulated her. I will sue this firm into the ground. I will drag you through every court in the state. And you," he pointed a shaking finger at me, "do not think for a second you are keeping a dime of my money." Grant stood up then. He was not a large man, but he possessed a gravity that Caleb lacked. He picked up the thick file, the Hart Family Trust, and tucked it under his arm. "It is not your money, Mr. Donnelly. That is the point. And as for suing, I would advise against it. The trust has a fee-shifting provision. If you challenge it and lose, you pay all legal costs for both sides. And given the evidence of the trigger event we just recorded, you will lose." Grant looked down at me again. His eyes softened behind his glasses. "Ms. Bell," he said, and the room seemed to shrink down to just the two of us. "From this moment forward, no one in this room has the right to dictate your future. No one has the right to tell you where you belong or who you are. The contents of that trust give you the one thing they have always tried to take away." "What is that?" I asked. "Leverage," Grant said. "Total, absolute leverage." He nodded at the envelope in my hands. "Open it when you are alone, but know this the moment you sign the acceptance within that folder. You are not just an heir. You are the owner." I looked at Caleb. He was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and genuine shock. He looked smaller than he had 5 minutes ago. The giant who had cast a shadow over my entire life was suddenly just a man in an expensive suit, terrified of a piece of paper. I looked at Tessa and Bryce. The smirk was gone from Tessa's face, replaced by a cold, calculating fear. Bryce looked like he was about to be sick. I looked down at the envelope. Harper Bell, my name, my mother's handwriting. I realized then that I wasn't just holding a will, I was holding a weapon. And for the first time in my life, my hand was on the trigger. I walked out of the law office and into the rain. The envelope Grant Halbrook had given me was tucked inside my jacket, pressed against my ribs like a second heart. I did not open it immediately. I could not. The adrenaline that had kept my spine straight in that conference room was beginning to fade, replaced by a hollow, aching exhaustion that I had carried for nearly 3 decades. I got into my sedan, a reliable 10-year-old model that I had paid for with cash earned from double shifts, and I just sat there. The wipers slapped a rhythm against the glass. 1, 2, 1, 2. It was a metronome counting back time, pulling me away from the victory in the lawyer's office and dragging me back to where it all started. Grant had called me a guest in that room, but he did not know the half of it. I had been a guest in my own life since I was 5 years old. That was the year my mother, Lydia Hart, a young widow with too much grief and too many bills, married Caleb Donnelly. I remember the day we moved into his house on the ridge. It was a sprawling, pristine structure with white columns and a lawn so manicured it looked like artificial turf. I remember stepping into the foyer, clutching a ragged stuffed bear that smelled like our old apartment. Caleb had looked down at me, not with malice, but with a cool, detached appraisal. He looked at me the way a man looks at a scratch on the bumper of a new car, a flaw he would have to tolerate but would never stop noticing. "Harper," he had said, his voice smooth and deep. "We do not leave toys in the common areas. This is a house for adults. Your room is upstairs. Keep your things there." He did not shout. Caleb never shouted. He did not hit. He did not need to. He operated on a system of exclusion so precise it could cut glass. Over the next 30 years, I learned the rules of the Donnelly kingdom. It was a constitutional monarchy where Caleb was king, and my mother was the consort who had been allowed in on a conditional visa. When Tessa and Bryce were born 2 years later, the hierarchy solidified. They were the heirs. I was the baggage. The hallway leading to the living room was the gallery of my erasure. It was lined with framed professional photographs documenting the rise of the Donnelly family. There were photos of Tessa at her first ballet recital, looking like a porcelain doll. There were photos of Bryce holding a trophy from his Pee-wee soccer league. There were endless studio portraits of the 4 of them, Caleb, Mom, Tessa, and Bryce, all wearing matching sweaters, all smiling with teeth that had been straightened by the best orthodontists in the state. I was in none of them. Well, that is not entirely true. In one photo from a trip to the coast, you could see a blurry elbow on the far left edge of the frame. That was me. I had been standing next to Mom, but when the photographer sent the proofs, Caleb had selected the crop that centered his real family. I remember asking Mom about it when I was 10. She had looked at the photo, then at me, her eyes filling with a sudden, terrified water. She told me the photographer made a mistake, but later that night, I found a $20 bill tucked under my pillow. It was hush money. It was an apology she could not speak aloud. That was the pattern. Caleb would slice away a piece of my dignity, and Mom would try to patch the wound in secret. I grew up understanding that I was a line item in a budget Caleb resented balancing. He provided a roof and food, but he made sure I knew the cost of every calorie. If I asked for money for a school field trip, he would sigh, pull out his ledger, and give me a lecture on fiscal responsibility that lasted 40 minutes. If Tessa asked for a pony because her friend had one, he would laugh and ask what color she wanted. There was a night when I was 12 that defined our dynamic perfectly. We had finished dinner, roast chicken and vegetables. I had accidentally knocked over a glass of water. It didn't break, but the water soaked the tablecloth. The table went silent. Tessa and Bryce, then 7 years old, looked at their father. They knew the weather was changing. Caleb set down his fork. He looked at the stain, then he looked at me. "Careless," he said. "You have no respect for things that do not belong to you." "I am sorry," I whispered. I will clean it up. You will, he said. And you will do the dishes tonight. All of them. By hand. The dishwasher is for the family to use after a meal. You need to learn the value of labor. He took Tessa and Bryce into the living room to watch a movie. I could hear the opening credits of a Disney film, the sound of their laughter. I stood at the sink, my hands red in scalding water, scrubbing plates that felt heavy as stones. Halfway through, I felt a presence beside me. It was Mom. She didn't say a word. She checked the hallway to make sure Caleb wasn't looking. Then she picked up a drying towel. We worked in silence, her shoulder brushing against mine. She was crying without making a sound. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her to stop being so weak, to tell her to leave him. But I was 12, and I needed a roof, and she was terrified. So we just washed the dishes. That night planted a seed in me. I decided that I would never, ever owe Caleb Donnelly a thing. I would become so self-sufficient that he would have no leverage. I threw myself into my education with a desperate, frantic energy. I studied until my eyes burned. I became the student who stayed after class, the one who did the extra credit assignments that weren't required. When I turned 16, I got a job at a diner across town, working evenings and weekends. I lied to my friends and said I was busy with sports. I wasn't. I was banking every dime of that $7.25 an hour. When college applications came around, I didn't ask Caleb for a cent. I applied for every scholarship I could find. Academic, need-based, local Rotary clubs if there was an application. I filled it out. When the acceptance letter came from the state university with a full ride, I felt a surge of triumph so powerful it nearly knocked me over. I thought I had done it. I thought I had beaten the system. I moved out 2 weeks after high school graduation. I packed my life into 3 cardboard boxes and never looked back. While I was scraping by in a dorm room, eating instant noodles and working in the library to pay for textbooks, Caleb was building his empire. He founded Donnelly Ridge Holdings, a boutique investment and real estate firm that capitalized on the booming Asheville market. He was everywhere. His face was on billboards. He was in the local paper, shaking hands with the mayor, cutting ribbons at new developments. The articles always described him as a pillar of the community and a devoted family man. It made me sick. I knew the man behind the smile. I knew the man who inspected the dust on the baseboards with a white glove. I knew the man who told my mother she was lucky he had taken on her baggage. I chose my career as a direct response to him. I went into corporate compliance. I got a job at Blue Cedar Risk Compliance, a firm that specialized in auditing and regulatory adherence. My job was to read contracts, scan ledgers, and find the things people were trying to hide. I had a nose for it. I could smell a lie in a spreadsheet from 3 pages away. It was a skill I had honed at the dinner table, watching Caleb explain why he couldn't afford to fix my car while simultaneously buying a new boat for the lake house. I thought I had escaped. I really did. I paid my own rent. I bought my own car. I built a life that had nothing to do with the Donnelly money. I was proud of my independence. I wore it like armor. But then Mom got sick. It started slow fatigue, weight loss, and then it cascaded into a terminal diagnosis that no amount of money could fix. For the last 2 years, I had been drawn back into the orbit of that house. I had to go. She was my mother. Caleb played the role of the grieving, supportive husband to perfection. He hired the best nurses. He remodeled the downstairs guest room into a hospital suite. When neighbors brought casseroles, he would sigh and say, "I just want Lydia to be comfortable. She relies on me for everything. You know, she always has." He loved that narrative, the helpless wife, the savior husband. But inside the house, when the neighbors were gone, the mask slipped. I remember a Tuesday afternoon. 3 weeks before she died, I was sitting by her bedside, reading to her while she slept. Caleb walked in. He checked the monitors, then looked at me. "You have been here 4 days in a row. Harper," he said, "do you not have a job to get to? I would hate for you to be unemployed and come looking for a handout." I took personal leave. "Caleb," I said, not looking up from my book, I am here for her. Just do not embarrass me, he said. When the funeral comes, I expect you to sit with the family, but do not think that means you are part of the estate. I have secured the future for my children. You have your little job. He walked out. Mom's eyes fluttered open. She had heard him. She looked at me, her face gaunt, her skin like paper. She reached out and squeezed my hand with a strength that surprised me. Harper, she rasped. I am here. Mom, I said. Ignore him. He is just Caleb. She shook her head. A strange smile played on her lips. It wasn't a sad smile. It was the smile of someone who knows the end of a movie that everyone else is still watching. Look in the bottom drawer of my sewing table, she whispered. When I am gone, not before. What is in there? I asked. A phone, she said. My other phone. I frowned. You have 2 phones. I have had a lot of things you do not know about, she said. Her voice was getting weaker, fading into the drug-induced haze of the morphine. He thinks I was weak. Harper, he thinks I just sat here for 30 years and let him win. She closed her eyes. He is wrong. Sitting in my car outside the law office, listening to the rain, I finally understood what she meant. I looked down at the folder Grant had given me. For 30 years, I thought my mother was a victim. I thought she was a sweet, passive woman who had traded her autonomy for security. I thought I was the strong one because I fought back, because I left, because I shouted. I was wrong. I was the loud distraction. She was the silent assassin. I put the car in gear. I needed to go home. I needed to open this envelope, and then I needed to find that sewing table. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just a guest in the Donnelly narrative. I was the one holding the pen, and I was about to rewrite the whole damn story. Grant Halbrook did not rush. He adjusted his glasses, opened the thick folder labeled Hart Family, Irrevocable Trust, and smoothed the top page with the flat of his hand. The sound of dry paper sliding against the mahogany table was the only noise in the room. It sounded like a blade being sharpened. I watched Caleb. He was trying to regain his composure, trying to shrink back into the persona of the benevolent patriarch. But his eyes were darting around the room. He was looking for an exit, or perhaps a witness he could charm. There was neither. Let us discuss the corpus of the trust, Grant said, his voice devoid of theatricality. He was reading from a spreadsheet. The assets originated from the liquidation of the Hart estate prior to your marriage to Ms. Hart in 1995. Specifically, the sale of a majority stake in a company called Hartway Freight Systems. Tessa let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She shook her head, her perfectly highlighted hair catching the light. Hartway, please. Mom told us about that. It was a trucking company her first husband ran. It went bust. That is why she had to sell the house and move into the apartment where Dad found her. She was destitute. She was liquid, Grant corrected her. He did not look up. She sold Hartway Freight Systems to a logistics conglomerate out of Chicago 3 months before she met your father. The sale price was not public record because it was a private acquisition. However, the net proceeds after tax were substantial. Caleb was staring at the lawyer. His mouth was slightly open. Lydia told me she was bankrupt. She told me the creditors took everything. I paid off her credit cards. Grant, I paid for her car insurance. I gave her an allowance. She accepted the allowance to keep the peace, Grant said. And she kept her own money in a blind trust, managed by this firm, designed specifically to remain invisible to a future spouse. It is a standard asset protection strategy, though Mrs. Donnelly executed it with unusual discipline. How much? Caleb demanded. His voice was thick. How much is in there? Grant ran his finger down the column of figures. With aggressive compounding over 30 years, diversified market investments, and a few key venture capital entries that performed exceptionally well as of the closing of the markets yesterday, the total value of the trust stands at approximately $19.6 million. The air left the room. I felt a physical jolt in my chest, like I had missed a step on a staircase. 19 million? My mother, who clipped coupons for laundry detergent, who let Caleb lecture her about leaving lights on because electricity costs money, sat on a fortune that could have bought his entire company twice over. Tessa looked like she had been slapped. She turned to Caleb. "Daddy, that is not possible. Is it?" Caleb did not answer. He was pale. He was doing the math in his head. He was realizing that every time he had handed my mother a $100 bill for groceries and expected gratitude, she had been acting. She had been playing a role. "That is fraud," Bryce said, his voice trembling. "She lied to him for 30 years. That is spousal fraud. We can pierce the trust. Marriage is a financial partnership. She hid assets." "Premarital assets are not community property in North Carolina unless commingled," Grant said smoothly, "and she never commingled a cent. Not one penny of this money ever touched a joint account. She was extremely careful. She let you pay for everything, Mr. Donnelly, which, legally speaking, was very generous of you." Grant turned a page. "But the cash value is only part of the portfolio. There is a matter of the passive equity holdings." He looked at Caleb then. A strange look crossed the lawyer's face. It was almost pity, but it was too cold for that. "Mr. Donnelly, are you familiar with the Vantage Point Growth Fund?" Caleb blinked. The name clearly meant something to him. "Yes, of course. They are a private equity group. I secured a mezzanine loan from them 4 years ago to expand the Donnelly Ridge commercial complex. It was a standard business transaction." "It was," Grant agreed. "A $5 million loan at 8% interest, secured against your personal equity in the firm. A high-risk loan." "It was necessary capital," Caleb snapped. "Business is about leverage." "Indeed," Grant said. "Well, you will be interested to know that the Hart Family Trust is a limited partner in the Vantage Point Growth Fund. In fact, the trust owns roughly 12% of the fund's total capital pool." I watched the realization hit Caleb. It happened in slow motion. His eyes widened, then narrowed. His jaw clenched. "Meaning," Grant continued, spelling it out for the room, "that when you borrowed that money, you were effectively borrowing from your wife, and for the last 4 years, the interest payments you have been struggling to meet. A portion of them has been flowing directly back into this trust." I covered my mouth with my hand. I had to. A laugh was bubbling up in my throat. A hysterical, jagged thing. My mother had not just hidden money. She had become his creditor. Every time Caleb boasted about his business acumen at the dinner table, every time he told us how he was leveraging debt to build an empire, he had been paying interest to the woman sitting quietly at the other end of the table eating peas. "That is impossible," Caleb whispered. "I would have seen her name on the documents." "Blind trust," Grant repeated. "You saw a corporate entity number. You never looked deeper because you never assumed your wife was capable of high-level finance. You underestimated her. Mr. Donnelly." Consistently, Caleb slumped back in his chair. He looked defeated, but then, the survival instinct that had made him rich kicked back in. He straightened his tie. He placed his hands flat on the table. "Fine," he said. His voice was brittle. "She had money. She hid it. That hurts, but it does not change the law. I am the surviving spouse. Even with a separate trust, I have a claim to an elective share. I can challenge the validity of the exclusion." "You could have," Grant said, "if this were a standard will, but this is a revocable trust that became irrevocable upon death, governed by the conditional addendum." Grant tapped the second folder, the one that had appeared after Caleb's fatal sentence. "Let us review the mechanism one more time, so there is no confusion. The conditional addendum was an amendment drafted 5 years ago. It stated that the control of the trust would remain with the primary trustees, a board appointed by this firm, unless a specific trigger event occurred." "The trigger?" Caleb spat. "My words." "Your disavowal," Grant corrected. "The document is explicit. It says, should Caleb Donnelly, in the presence of legal counsel and heirs, verbally deny the familial status of Harper Bell or attempt to distinguish her from his biological issue for the purpose of inheritance exclusion, the position of successor trustee shall immediately transfer to Harper Bell." Grant looked at me. "That means Ms. Belle, you do not just get the money, you get the control. You can liquidate the positions. You can call in the loans. You can audit the prior years. Call in the loans, I asked. My mind raced to the Vantage Point debt. The trust has rights as a major stakeholder in the fund, Grant said. But we can discuss strategy later. Caleb stood up again. Lydia would never do this. She loved me. She was grateful to me. You forged this, Grant. You and this ungrateful girl cooked this up. Sit down, Caleb, Grant said. It was not a request. It was an order. Grant opened the folder to a specific page. It was a scanned copy of a document. At the bottom, in blue ink, was my mother's signature. And next to it, a notary stamp dated 5 years ago. She did it, Grant said. And she did it because she knew you. She knew that the moment she was gone, the moment her influence was removed, you would revert to type. She bet $19 million that you could not get through this meeting without cutting Harper out, and she won. Grant slid a thick document toward me. It was the acceptance of trusteeship and beneficiary status. Ms. Bell, he said, I need you to sign at the tabs. Once you sign, the assets transfer to your name effectively immediately. The accounts will be frozen to anyone but you. I picked up the heavy fountain pen Grant offered. The black resin felt cool against my sweating palm. I looked at the paper. It was a wall of legal text, but the meaning was simple freedom. I moved the pen toward the paper. Wait, Grant said sharply. I stopped, the nib hovering an inch above the signature line. Grant reached into the folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a legal document. It was stationery, Lydia's personal stationery, with the small lavender flower embossed in the corner. Before you accept the burden of this trust, Grant said, his voice softening, there is a memorandum of intent. It is not legally binding, but your mother instructed me to ensure you read it before you signed the acceptance. She wanted you to know why. He placed the letter over the contract. I looked at the text. It was typed, but there were handwritten notes in the margins. I could feel my mother's presence in the room, stronger than the scent of lilies, stronger than the anger radiating from Caleb. Bryce stood up then. He had been quiet, calculating, but now he saw the money slipping away for good. The facade of the nice brother cracked wide open. Do not sign that. Harper, he said. His voice was low, threatening. If you sign that, we will sue you. We will tie this up in probate for 10 years. You will never see a dime. We will bleed you dry with legal fees. You know Dad has the lawyers to do it. Caleb nodded, latching on to his son's aggression. He is right. You are a compliance officer. Harper, you make $60,000 a year. I have a war chest. I will bury you in paperwork. Walk away. Take a settlement. We will give you $50,000. Enough for a down payment on a condo. Just walk away. I looked at them. They looked like wolves who had suddenly realized the sheep had fangs. Grant cleared his throat. I anticipated this reaction, which is why I must draw your attention to Article 9, subsection C of the trust instrument. Caleb looked at him with loathing. What now? The fee-shifting provision, Grant said. The trust includes a no-contest clause with a specific indemnification rider. It states that in the event of any legal challenge to the validity of the trust or the beneficiary designation, the trust is authorized to use its full assets to defend itself. Grant took off his glasses and polished them on his lapel. Furthermore, if the challenging party loses, which, given the video evidence and the notary seals, is a certainty, the trust is entitled to collect all legal fees, court costs, and punitive damages from the challengers personally. Grant looked at Bryce. That means, young man, if you sue Harper and lose, she does not pay her lawyers. You do, and she can hire the most expensive firm in New York to defend her and send the bill to your personal bank account or your father's company. Caleb froze. I saw the blood drain from his face completely. He understood leverage. He understood risk. And he just realized he was staring down the barrel of a cannon. You are bluffing, Caleb whispered, but there was no conviction in it. Try me, Grant said. Please, I drafted this instrument myself. I have been waiting 5 years to litigate it. Grant turned back to me. He tapped the memorandum of intent. Read the letter. Harper, he said gently. Then sign the papers. This trust was not just built to give you money, it was built to survive a man like him. I looked down at the letter. I ignored Caleb's heavy breathing. I ignored Tessa's quiet sobbing. I focused on the words my mother had left for me, the final piece of the puzzle she had been constructing while she was dying in the guest room of a house she never truly owned. I began to read. The ink on the signature page was still wet, glistening under the fluorescent lights of the conference room. Caleb, Tessa, and Bryce had stormed out moments after Grant threatened the fee-shifting provision, leaving a silence that felt heavy and pressurized, like the air before a thunderstorm. Grant did not congratulate me. He did not offer a handshake or a smile. Instead, he reached under the table and pulled out a banker's box. It was a plain, cardboard box, the kind you buy in packs of 10 at an office supply store, but it was taped shut with layers of security tape. He set it down in front of me and used a small penknife to slice through the seal. The trust instrument is the legal framework. Harper, Grant said quietly. But this is the history. He removed the lid. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or gold bars. There were just files, hundreds of them, manila folders organized by year, stretching back over 2 decades. Your mother corresponded with me through a secure server, Grant explained, pulling out a sheaf of printed emails. She used an encrypted account under the name L. Hart, private. She never accessed it from your home Wi-Fi. She only checked it when she was at the public library or, later, from a burner phone she kept in her sewing kit. I reached for the top file. It was labeled simply, Education, H. Bell. My hands shook as I opened it. The first document was a copy of a letter I knew by heart. It was the acceptance letter for the North Carolina Merit-Based Opportunity Grant that I had received the spring of my senior year. I remembered that day vividly. I had run into the kitchen, waving the letter, screaming that I had won a partial scholarship $5,000 a semester. It was the only reason I could afford to go to the state university instead of community college. I remembered showing it to Caleb. He had barely looked up from his newspaper. Good, he had said. That is $5,000 I do not have to waste on a degree you will probably never use. I looked at the document in the file. It wasn't a notification from the State Board of Education. It was a wire transfer confirmation from the Hart Family Trust to a shell nonprofit organization called the Piedmont Student Aid Fund. The grant did not exist, Grant said softly. The Piedmont Fund was a pass-through entity we set up. Your mother funded the scholarship. She fully funded it. I felt the tears prick my eyes, hot and sudden. But I applied. I wrote an essay. She read it, Grant said. She sent me a copy. She said it was brilliant, but she knew that if she tried to give you tuition money directly, Caleb would have vetoed it. He would have claimed it was spoiling you or that the family budget could not support it. Or worse, he would have held it over your head every single day, demanding you study business instead of literature. So, she invented a scholarship. I flipped the page. There was another wire transfer. This one was dated 4 years later. $2,000. The memo line read, Graduation expenses and relocation assistance. I remembered that money. I thought it was a refund for my dorm deposit and a lucky break on selling my used textbooks. I had used it to rent a moving van and drive to my first job in Charlotte. She watched everything, Grant said. Every time you thought you caught a lucky break, every time the universe seemed to cut you a little slack, it was Lydia. I dug deeper into the box. I found a folder labeled Housing. 2015. That was the year I bought my first apartment. It was a tiny 1-bedroom walk-up that smelled of old carpet, but it was mine. I had scraped together the down payment over 3 years of eating instant oatmeal and working overtime, but I had been short. I was $3,000 short of the closing costs. I was about to walk away from the deal when my broker called and said there was a first-time buyer incentive program I qualified for that would cover the difference. I pulled out the email chain in the folder. Subject closing gap. From L. Hart. Private to Grant Halbrook. Harper is 3,000 short. She is not sleeping. I can hear it in her voice when she calls. If she loses this apartment, she will have to move back to Asheville. And if she moves back here, Caleb will suffocate her. Initiate the transfer to the broker's escrow account. Make it look like a municipal grant. Do not let her know it came from me. If she knows, she will feel guilty. If Caleb knows, he will demand I co-sign and take equity. I lowered the paper. My chest ached. I had spent so many nights during those years lying awake, counting pennies, feeling proud of my grit. I had walked around with my chin held high, telling myself that I was a self-made woman, that I had built my life without a single handout from the Donnelly empire, and I had, but I hadn't built it alone. My mother had been there the whole time, a silent architect in the shadows, shoring up the foundation whenever it threatened to crack. I remember one month, I whispered, my voice trembling. I was 22. I had a flat tire and a dental emergency in the same week. I had $12 in my checking account. I didn't eat dinner for 10 days so I could pay the mechanic. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. She knew, Grant said. He pointed to a document near the bottom of the stack. She sent you a birthday card that month with $200 cash inside. Do you remember? I nodded. I thought she had saved it from the grocery allowance. She did not have a grocery allowance. Harper. Caleb audited the receipts. If she spent $10 too much at the supermarket, he would lecture her for an hour. That $200, she sold her grandmother's silver brooches to a pawn shop 3 towns over to get that cash. She drove there while Caleb was at a golf tournament. I closed my eyes. I could picture her, my elegant, quiet mother, haggling with a pawnbroker, terrified that someone might see her, just so she could slip cash into a birthday card. Why, I asked, why didn't she just leave him? She had $19 million. Grant, she could have taken me and left when I was 10. We could have gone anywhere. Because of the custody laws, Grant said grimly, and because of the prenup, Caleb had ironclad clauses. If she left, she risked a protracted legal battle that would have exposed her assets. He would have fought for everything, just to spite her, and she was afraid that if she disrupted his life, he would take it out on you. She decided that the safest place for her money was in the dark, growing, waiting for the moment you were strong enough to wield it. He leaned forward. She did not buy luxuries, Harper. She bought your escape. She bought your autonomy. Every dollar in this trust was saved with the specific intention of making you bulletproof. I wiped my eyes and reached for the next folder, but when I saw the label, I stopped. Beneficiary support. Tessa and Bryce. I frowned. Grant, this is a mistake. These are Caleb's children. Open it, Grant said. I flipped open the cover. Inside were receipts, hundreds of them. There was a receipt for a ballet camp in New York, $3,000. I remembered Tessa going to that camp when she was 15. She had bragged about it for months. Caleb had told everyone at the country club that he was sending his little princess to train with the best. The check was signed by the trustee of the Hart Family Trust. There was an invoice for SAT prep courses, the elite. Private tutoring kind. That was for Bryce. Caleb had claimed Bryce got his scores through natural intellect and hard work. But then I saw the medical bills. Psychotherapy. Dr. Ellen Friedman. The patient name was Tessa Donnelly. The dates covered a 2-year period when Tessa was 16 and 17. Tessa was in therapy, I asked, stunned. Caleb doesn't believe in therapy. He calls it weakness for people who cannot handle reality. Tessa was struggling with an eating disorder, Grant said quietly. Caleb told her to just eat a burger and stop being dramatic. He refused to pay for a shrink. He said it would look bad on the insurance records if anyone found out. Your mother found a therapist who took cash. She paid for every session out of the trust. She drove Tessa there herself and told Caleb they were going shopping. I stared at the page. My mother had saved Tessa's life. The sister who had sneered at me today, who had looked at me with such disdain she had been protected by the same woman she treated like furniture. And Bryce? I asked. Gambling debt, Grant said. Sophomore year of college. He got in over his head with some bookies online. $7,000. He was terrified to tell Caleb. Caleb would have disowned him, or at least cut him off. Bryce went to your mother crying. She paid it off the next morning. I sat back, the room spinning slightly. She helped them, I said. She helped the children who treated her like a servant. She was a mother. Harper, Grant said. She saw 2 children who were being crushed by the same man who was crushing her. She knew they weren't her blood, and she knew they would never be loyal to her. But she couldn't watch them drown. That was the difference between her and Caleb. Caleb views people as investments. Lydia viewed them as human beings. He tapped the folder. But make no mistake, she knew who they would become. She knew that when she died, their loyalty to their father and their greed would override any kindness she had shown them. That is why she excluded them from the trust. She paid for their survival while she was alive. She was not obligated to fund their arrogance after she was dead. I looked at the pile of papers. It wasn't just accounting. It was a map of a battlefield. My mother had been fighting a war in her own kitchen for 30 years. She had been moving pieces, covering losses, and fortifying defenses, all while pouring tea and smiling at a man who thought he owned her. I picked up the final item in the box. It wasn't a folder. It was a single yellow sticky note attached to a thick, bound document at the very bottom. The handwriting was hurried, jagged, as if she had written it quickly. Grant, if he ever says it out loud, if he ever says the words, "my real children," give Harper the addendum, do not hesitate. If he says it, it means he has finally erased me completely. And if I am erased, Harper is in danger. Give her the sword. I traced the word sword with my fingertip. The meeting today, the reading of the will. It hadn't been a standard procedure. It had been a final test. My mother knew Caleb's vanity. She knew his need to assert dominance. She had baited a trap with her own silence, knowing that eventually his ego would snap it shut. She knew he would say it, I said. She knew he couldn't help himself. She bet $19 million on his narcissism, Grant said. And she was right. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. Harper, you need to understand something. The money is yours. The house he is living in, the mortgage, was serviced by banks that sold the debt to funds we invested in. The commercial loans for his business, we hold the paper. You are not just wealthy. You are the invisible hand that has been holding up his entire world. I looked down at the documents. The fear I had felt for 30 years, the fear of Caleb's disapproval, the fear of poverty, the fear of being the outsider began to evaporate. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the poor stepdaughter. I was the CEO of the company that owned Caleb Donnelly's life. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the mahogany. The sound was jarring in the quiet room. I picked it up. A text message notification lit up the screen. It was from Bryce. You signed it, didn't you? Dad says you are stealing our inheritance. He says you manipulated Mom when she was sick. We are coming for you. Harper, don't spend a dime. It's not yours. I read the message twice, 10 minutes ago. That text would have terrified me. It would have made me want to apologize, to smooth things over, to retreat. But now I looked at the receipts for his gambling debts. I looked at the records of the therapy sessions my mother had paid for to save his sister. I looked at the scholarship letter that had allowed me to escape their house. I didn't reply. I simply turned the phone face down. Grant, I said, my voice steady. I want a full audit of the Donnelly Ridge Holdings loan agreements held by the Vantage Point Fund, and I want to know exactly what the terms are for calling in a distressed debt. Grant turned from the window. A small, grim smile touched his lips. I have the files right here, he said. Shall we begin? I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped into the quiet. It was a suffocating kind of silence, the heavy static air of a space that has been waiting for someone to return. I locked the deadbolt behind me, a habit I had picked up when I was 19 and living in a neighborhood where the streetlights rarely worked, and I leaned my back against the wood. The only sound in the room was the low, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette. It was a grounding noise, a reminder that the world was still turning, that electricity was still flowing, even if the tectonic plates of my life had just shifted violently. I walked to the sofa and sat down, still wearing my coat. The cream-colored envelope Grant Halbrook had given me was in my hand. It was warm from where I had held it against my body. I ran my thumb over the seal. It wasn't wax. It was a simple adhesive strip, but opening it felt like breaking a treaty. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside, there were no legal documents. There were no notary stamps or whereas clauses. There was just a sheaf of stationery, the same heavy paper I had seen in Grant's office. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was looping and precise, the ink slightly indented into the page where she had pressed down hard. My dearest Harper, if you are reading this, 2 things have happened. First, I am gone. And second, Caleb has finally said the quiet part out loud. I took a breath, the air trembling in my lungs. I know you have spent most of your life wondering why I stayed. I saw it in your eyes when you were 12 and washing dishes while he watched television. I saw it when you were 16 and he refused to let you go on the school trip to Washington. I saw the judgment. Harper, I saw the disappointment. You thought I was weak. You thought I loved the security more than I loved my own dignity. You were half right. I did choose security. When your father, your real father, died, I was 26 years old with a toddler and a mountain of debt. I was terrified. The world felt like a mouth waiting to swallow us. When Caleb came along, he didn't look like a husband. He looked like a fortress. He looked like walls that would keep the wind out. That was my great sin. Harper, I traded our peace for his walls. I thought I could pay the rent with my silence. I wiped a tear that had fallen onto my knuckle. I didn't want to blur the ink, but by the time I realized the price was too high, I was trapped. Not just by the prenup or the lack of money I could have handled being poor again. I stayed because of the others. I stayed because of Tessa and Bryce. I paused. I looked up at the empty room. She stayed for them. The children who had treated her like a servant in her own home. I know what they are to you. I know they are spoiled and cruel, and that they look at you like you are a stain on their perfect picture. But I saw what Caleb was doing to them. He was hollowing them out. Harper, he was treating them like bonsai trees, snipping off every part of their personalities that didn't fit his design. He wanted clones. He wanted mirrors. If I had left, he would have had total control. There would have been no one to soften the blows, no one to pay for the therapy he forbade, no one to remind them, even in small whispers. That kindness wasn't a weakness. I stayed to be the buffer. I stayed to make sure that even if they turned out damaged, they wouldn't turn out completely empty. But I knew I couldn't save them, not fully, and I knew I couldn't protect you while I was alive. He was too strong, and I had given him too much ground. So, I started building the exit, the trust, the money, the secret accounts that isn't about revenge. Harper, revenge is for people who have time to waste, and I have wasted enough time. This is about leverage. It is about taking back the pen. For 30 years. Caleb has told the story of this family. He decided who was smart, who was worthy, who was real. He decided that you were the charity case. He spun that story so well that even you started to believe it. I saw you working yourself to the bone, trying to prove him wrong. But deep down, a part of you wondered if he was right, wondered if you were just a guest. This document, the conditional addendum, is the truth. It is the proof that his story was a lie. I didn't trigger this. Harper, he did. I wrote the condition because I knew him. I knew that in his grief, or what he calls grief, which is really just the panic of losing a possession he would need to reassert his dominance. He would need to draw a line in the sand to make himself feel big again. He would need to separate his real blood from the outsider. I bet my fortune that he would try to erase you one last time, and by doing so, he handed you the eraser. I let out a sob, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the walls. She knew. She had played a game of 3-dimensional chess against a man who thought she was playing checkers, and she had checkmated him from the grave. There is one more thing. Go to Harbor Point Trust Bank on 4th Street. Ask for safety deposit box number 409. The key is taped to the back of the framed photo of your grandmother in my sewing room, the one Caleb always said was too rustic for the living room. Inside the box, you will not find money. You will find my journals. You will find the letters I wrote to you on your birthdays, but never mailed because he checked the outgoing post. You will find the original birth certificates and the adoption papers he refused to sign. You will find the history of us. Harper, the real history. But listen to me closely. Do not use this money to destroy them. It will be tempting. You have the power now to burn his company to the ground, to evict him, to humiliate him the way he humiliated us. But if you do that, you are just playing his game with a different bank account. Don't use the money to win. Use it to escape. Use it to escape the voice in your head that sounds like him. Use it to buy the silence you need to hear your own thoughts. Use it to build a wall that he cannot climb over, and then sit behind that wall and live a life that has absolutely nothing to do with Caleb Donnelly. He wanted you to be nothing, so the greatest punishment you can inflict on him is to be everything. Without him, I love you. I have always loved you, and I am so sorry it took me dying to give you the life you deserved. Love, Mom. I lowered the letter. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled like dry leaves. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. The tears were flowing freely now, hot and salt-heavy, soaking into the collar of my shirt. I wasn't crying because of the money. I wasn't crying because of the vindication. I was crying because for 30 years, I thought my mother was a ghost haunting her own house. I thought she was fragile. I thought she had surrendered. But she hadn't surrendered. She had been digging a tunnel. Every time she smiled at Caleb while he insulted her, she was digging. Every time she washed the dishes he told me to wash, she was digging. She had been digging for decades, just so she could hand me the shovel the moment she was gone. She wasn't weak. She was the strongest person I had ever known. She had endured a slow, quiet suffocation just to make sure I could breathe. I looked at the signature again. Love, Mom. It felt like she was in the room with me. I could smell her perfume, lavender and vanilla, faint but real. The crushing weight of the last 3 decades, the feeling of being small, of being less than, began to lift. The silence in the apartment wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was full of her. Then, the silence shattered. My phone, which I had left on the coffee table, began to buzz violently against the wood. The screen lit up, flashing a name that made my stomach tighten by reflex. Bryce Donnelly. I stared at it. The old Harper. The Harper from yesterday. Would have panicked. She would have wondered what she had done wrong. She would have rehearsed an apology. But I wasn't that Harper anymore. I had the letter. I had the truth. I picked up the phone and swiped the green icon. I didn't say hello. I just put the phone to my ear and waited. Harper? Bryce's voice was high, tight with a panic I had never heard in him before. He sounded like a child who had lost his mother in a grocery store, but with an edge of malice. Are you there? You need to listen to me. I am listening, Bryce, I said. My voice was calm. It sounded like the refrigerator hummed steady, mechanical, cold. Dad is going crazy, Bryce said. He is tearing the study apart looking for copies of the old wills. He called the partners at the firm. He is screaming about theft. Harper. He says you stole that money. He says you coerced Mom when she was on the morphine. Grant has the medical records. Bryce, I said. Mom signed the addendum 5 years ago. She was perfectly healthy. It doesn't matter, Bryce yelled. He will find a judge. He knows everyone in this town. If you don't withdraw that signature, if you don't call Grant right now and say it was a mistake. He paused, his breath hitching. What, Bryce? I asked. What will happen? He will make you lose everything, Bryce hissed. He will contact your boss at Blue Cedar. He will tell them you are under investigation for financial fraud. He will ruin your reputation. You know he can do it. He will make you unhireable. He will burn you down. Harper, just take the settlement. Dad said he would go up to $100,000. Just take it and go away. I looked at the letter in my lap. Don't use the money to win. Use it to escape, but before I could escape, I had to make sure they couldn't follow me. Bryce, I said softly. What? Tell Caleb that if he contacts my employer, I will authorize a forensic audit of the Vantage Point loan interest payments from 2020 to the present day. Tell him I will look at every single cent that flowed from Donnelly Ridge Holdings into the trust. There was silence on the other end. Dead silence. How do you know about that? Bryce whispered. I know everything, I said. And tell him one more thing. What? Tell him he shouldn't have said it out loud. I hung up the phone. The silence returned, but this time, it felt like armor. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I had work to do. They were going to come at me with everything they had. They were going to lie. They were going to sue. But they had no idea who they were fighting. They thought they were fighting Harper Bell, the quiet stepdaughter. They were wrong. They were fighting Lydia Hart, and she had already won. The process server arrived at my office at Blue Cedar Risk and Compliance exactly 48 hours after the funeral. He did not look like a movie villain. He looked like a bored college student in a windbreaker. He walked past the reception desk, asked for Harper Bell, and when I stood up, he shoved a thick envelope into my chest. You have been served, he said, and then he walked out, leaving me standing there while my coworkers pretended not to stare. I went into the break room and opened it. The lawsuit was titled, Donnelly et al. Vi. Bell. The plaintiffs were Tessa Donnelly and Bryce Donnelly, with Caleb listed as a third-party interest. The allegations were a greatest hits collection of character assassination, undue influence, elder abuse, fraud, and mental incapacity of the deceased. They were not just suing for the money, they were suing to destroy the narrative my mother had written. By that evening, the war had moved from the legal papers to the public square. Caleb was smart. He knew he could not win on the facts, so he decided to win on sentiment. A popular local blog, the Asheville Insider, ran a story with the headline, Grieving Family Blindside the Secret Will That Tore the Donnellys Apart. In the article, an anonymous source close to the family, who sounded suspiciously like Caleb, painted a tragic picture. They described me as the estranged, bitter stepdaughter who had taken advantage of a dying woman's confusion to cut out her beloved husband and children. There was a quote from Caleb, I just want to honor Lydia's true wishes. She was not herself at the end. We just want to heal. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was playing the victim to a crowd that had watched him donate to charity for 20 years. I sat in Grant Halbrook's office the next morning. The newspaper spread out between us. I felt like I was being hunted. They filed an emergency injunction, Grant said. He was calm, unbothered by the headlines. They want to freeze the trust assets pending the outcome of the litigation. They are arguing that if you have access to the funds, you will dissipate them before the court can rule. Can they do that? I asked. Can they freeze $19 million just because they are angry? They can try, Grant said, but they have a problem. To get an injunction, they have to prove a likelihood of success on the merits. They have to prove that it is probable they will win the fraud case, and they have zero evidence. They have stories, I said, pointing to the paper. They have lies. Courts do not rule on blog posts, Harper, Grant said. They rule on evidence, and right now, we are going to let them scream. The louder they scream, the more mistakes they will make. 2 weeks later, I walked into a deposition room in a high-rise building 3 blocks from Caleb's office. This was the discovery phase. This was where they tried to break me. The room was cold, air-conditioned to a temperature that felt designed to induce shivering. At the end of the long table sat Lionel Vance, Caleb's attorney. Vance was a man who was famous in North Carolina for 2 things, his Italian suits and his ability to make witnesses cry. He did not shake my hand. He pointed to a chair opposite him. A court reporter sat in the corner, her fingers hovering over a stenotype machine. A video camera was set up on a tripod, its unblinking black eye trained on my face. State your name for the record, Vance said. Harper Bell. Vance leaned forward. He had a way of smiling that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Bell. Let us talk about your relationship with your stepfather, Caleb Donnelly. You hated him, didn't you? Objection, Grant said from beside me. Relevance. It goes to motive. Counsel, Vance shot back. If she hated him, she had a motive to manipulate her mother into writing this vindictive addendum. He turned back to me. Well, Belle, did you hate him? I looked at the camera. I remembered my training. In compliance, you do not offer opinions. You do not offer emotions. You offer data. My feelings toward Mr. Donnelly are complex, I said, my voice steady. However, they are irrelevant to the validity of a legal document signed 5 years ago. Vance frowned. He didn't like that answer. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to say, yes, I hated him because he treated me like trash. If I said that, he could paint me as a vengeful harpy. Let us talk about your mother's mental state, Vance said, shifting gears. Toward the end, she was on heavy pain medication. Was she not? She was prescribed morphine for the last 3 weeks of her life, I said. And during those 3 weeks, you were alone with her for hours at a time, correct? I was her primary caretaker during the day, yes. Did you ever discuss the will with her during those times? Vance asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Did you ever suggest that perhaps Caleb did not deserve her money? Did you ever whisper in her ear that she should cut her other children out? I felt a flash of white-hot anger. He was twisting the most painful days of my life, the days I wiped my mother's brow and held her hand while she died, into something sinister. I took a breath. I looked at Grant. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I did not discuss the trust with my mother in the final weeks, I said, because the trust was already finalized. The conditional addendum was signed, notarized, and filed 5 years prior to her death. Her medication at the end is irrelevant to a document executed when she was in perfect health. Vance slammed his hand on the table. It was a calculated outburst, meant to rattle me. You expect this court to believe that a loving wife and mother secretly disinherited her family 5 years ago without any outside pressure. That is absurd. The only explanation is that you poisoned her mind against them over a long period. He leaned in, his face inches from the imaginary line between us. Tell me, Ms. Bell, why would she do it? Why would she create a clause that only activates if her husband says a few specific words? It sounds like a trap. It sounds like a game you two cooked up. It was not a game, I said. It was a protection mechanism. Protection from what? Vance sneered. From a grieving husband expressing his pain. From a narcissist expressing his truth. I said. Vance froze. He smiled. He thought he had me. So you admit it. You admit this document was designed to punish him for his personality. Grant, I said. Grant reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a small flash drive. Mr. Vance, Grant said, since we are discussing the activation of the clause, and you seem to be characterizing Mr. Donnelly's statement as grieving pain, I believe it is time to enter Exhibit C into the record. What is this? Vance asked, eyeing the drive. This is the audio recording of the meeting where the will was read, Grant said. The meeting where your client, Mr. Donnelly, triggered the addendum. Vance waved his hand. We have the transcript. We know what he said. He said, my real children will inherit everything. It was a slip of the tongue. Let us listen to the tone, Grant said. He plugged the drive into the laptop connected to the room's speaker system. He clicked a file, the room filled with the sound of rain hitting a window, then the creak of a leather chair. Then, Caleb's voice cut through the air. It wasn't the voice of a grieving man. It was the voice of a CEO closing a deal. It was cold, arrogant, and utterly dismissive. My real children will inherit everything. Then, the silence. Then, the sound of Tessa laughing. The recording played on. It captured Caleb's rage when the second folder was revealed. It captured his immediate shift from grieving husband to greedy businessman. It captured him asking, how much? What is she hiding? Grant stopped the playback. That, Grant said, pointing to the speaker, "is not a man in mourning. That is a man who thought he had successfully erased his stepdaughter. The addendum was not undue influence. It was a conditional contract. Mr. Donnelly held the key. He could have said nothing. He could have said, 'We are all her children.' If he had said that, the money would be his. He chose to exclude. He pulled the trigger on himself." Vance sat back. He looked at his client, who wasn't there, but whose presence hung over the table. Vance was a good lawyer. He knew the difference between a slip of the tongue and a statement of intent, and he knew that recording was a disaster for his case. "We are done for today," Vance said, closing his folder. "We will reserve the right to recall the witness." I walked out of that building feeling like I had just gone 12 rounds in a boxing ring. My hands were shaking, but my head was clear. 2 days later, Bryce reached out. He didn't text this time. He showed up at the coffee shop near my apartment where I stopped every morning before work. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, trying to look casual, trying to look like the brother I used to know before the money got in the way. "Harper," he said, stepping in front of me as I reached for the door handle. I stepped back. "I am not supposed to talk to you. Bryce, we are in litigation. Anything you say, I have to report to my lawyer." I know, he said, holding up his hands. "I just wanted to talk, off the record, brother to sister." "We are not brother and sister," I said. "According to your father. You are the real child. I am just the error." "Dad is losing it," Bryce said. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked tired. "He is obsessed. He is spending thousands a day on these lawyers. He is screaming at me and Tessa, 'Harper, he is going to burn through everything just to fight you.'" "That is his choice," I said. "Look," Bryce stepped closer. "I know Dad is difficult. I know he treated you badly. But Tessa and we were just kids. Why punish us? Why take everything?" He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that had worked on his teachers, his girlfriends, and even my mother. "I am not punishing you. Bryce," I said, "Mom left you plenty. She paid for your education. She paid your debts. You are 26 years old. You have a degree. Go get a job." Bryce's face hardened. The mask slipped for a second. "It is $19 million. Harper, you cannot just steal that. Look, if you agree to split it 3 ways, I can get Dad to back off. I can talk him down." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw his hand in his hoodie pocket. It was angled slightly outward. "Are you recording this?" I asked. Bryce blinked. "What? No, of course not." "Show me your phone," I said. "You are paranoid," he scoffed, taking a step back. "You are wearing a wire. Or you have your phone recording in that pocket," I said, my voice dropping to a low, compliance officer monotone. "You are trying to get me to admit to stealing, or to agree to a settlement so you can use it in court to prove I admit the trust is invalid. It is a discovery trap." Bryce's face turned red. He pulled his hand out of his pocket. He was holding his phone. The screen was black, but the red light of the voice memo app was pulsing at the top. "You are just like him," I said. "You think everyone is stupid but you." "You are going to lose," Bryce shouted, no longer whispering. People in the coffee shop turned to look. "He is going to find dirt on you. Harper, he has investigators digging through your trash. He will find something." "Let him dig," I said. "I recycle." I walked away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk. I didn't look back, but his words stuck with me. He has investigators digging. I went to work, but I couldn't concentrate. I felt like the walls were closing in. Caleb wasn't just suing. He was investigating. He was looking for a pressure point. He was looking for a secret he could leverage. That night, it rained again. I was sitting in my living room, the lights off, watching the street below. I wondered if the sedan parked across the street was a private investigator. I wondered if my phone was tapped. The paranoia was setting in. Just like Mom warned, use the money to escape the voice in your head. But I couldn't escape yet. I was trapped in the legal process. My phone rang. It was 11:30 at night. It was Grant. Grant, I answered. Is everything okay? Harper? Grant's voice was tight. It wasn't his usual calm, lawyerly tone. It was the voice of a man who had just found a bomb. Are you alone? Yes. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Grant said. We received a document dump from the opposing counsel tonight. It is part of the mandatory discovery. They sent over boxes of Caleb's financial records, trying to bury us in paper so we wouldn't find anything. Did they hide something? No, Grant said. They didn't hide it because Caleb doesn't think it matters. He thinks he is untouchable, but we have a team of forensic accountants working overtime. They found a trail. What kind of trail? We found a link between Donnelly Ridge Holdings and the Hartway sale. Grant said, The sale of your mother's company 30 years ago. I frowned. What link that was before they met? That is what we thought, Grant said. But we found a transfer of ownership document in Caleb's old files. It seems he didn't just meet your mother by accident at that diner. Harper. He was a junior broker on the deal that liquidated her company. He knew exactly how much money she had before he ever asked her on a first date. I felt the blood drain from my face. He knew. He always said she was broke. He lied, Grant said. But that is not the worst part. We found a document dated 3 years ago. It is a collateral assignment. Caleb pledged assets to secure a personal loan. What assets? He didn't pledge his assets, Grant said. He pledged the future expectation of the Hart Trust. My hand gripped the phone. He borrowed money against my mother's money while she was still alive. Yes, Grant said. And that is fraud. That is criminal fraud. But Harper, the bank he borrowed from, it is the same bank where your mother kept her safety deposit box. The one she told you about in the letter. Harbor Point. Yes, and if he has leverage at that bank, if he has a friend on the inside who let him pledge assets he didn't own. Grant paused. Harper, we might have just found the weapon that kills him. But we have to move fast. If he realizes we found this, he will destroy the originals. What do we do? I asked. We go on the offensive, Grant said. Tomorrow morning, we are not defending anymore. We are suing for theft. The conference room at the law firm had become my second home. For 3 days, Grant Halbrook and I had been drowning in the digital ocean of the discovery phase. Caleb's lawyers, thinking they could bury us in volume, had sent over gigabytes of data emails, scanned ledgers, internal memos, and bank statements dating back 10 years. They expected us to get tired. They expected us to glance at the totals and move on. They forgot who they were dealing with. I was a compliance officer. I did not get tired of details. I lived for them. It was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night when I found the first crack in the foundation. I was scrolling through a chain of emails between Caleb and his personal accountant, a man named Marcus, who had always smiled too much at the company Christmas parties. The subject line was benign, Re-Q3 expenses adjustment. I opened the attachment. It was a breakdown of Caleb's personal spending for the autumn of 2 years ago. That was right around the time my mother's condition had worsened, requiring specialized home equipment. I read the email Caleb had sent to Marcus. Marcus, the liquidity is tight this month. Take the membership dues for the Ridge Club and the dinner at the Capitol Grill on the 14th and recategorize them under the palliative care overhead. We can justify the dinner as a consultation with a specialist if anyone asks. Lydia's medical burn rate is high enough that no one will notice an extra $4,000 mixed in. Just bury it. I felt a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. I looked up at Grant, who was reviewing a stack of property deeds. He expensed his golf membership, I said, my voice flat, and a steak dinner. He charged them to my mother's dying days. Grant stopped reading. He walked over to my screen. He read the email twice. His jaw tightened. That is tax fraud, Grant said. But more importantly, it is evidence of commingling. He was treating your mother's care not as a familial duty, but as a tax shelter for his lifestyle. Keep digging, I said. If he did this, he did more. We worked through the night. By dawn, the picture of Caleb Donnelly, the benevolent patriarch, The self-made tycoon had dissolved into a mosaic of petty theft and arrogance. We found instances where he had signed my mother's name on insurance renewals. They were small things, documents she probably would have signed anyway, but he hadn't asked her. He had just forged her signature because it was inconvenient to walk up the stairs to her room. It wasn't enough to shatter the trust, but it was enough to prove a pattern. He viewed her agency as a nuisance. To him, she was just an obstacle to administrative efficiency. But the real knife, the one that turned the entire war upside down, was buried in a folder labeled Donnelly Ridge, Project Skyline. Project Skyline was Caleb's pride and joy. It was a luxury condominium complex downtown that he had completed 4 years ago. The local papers had called it a masterpiece of urban renewal. Caleb had accepted a plaque from the Chamber of Commerce. He had bragged at every dinner table for 6 months about how he had pulled the project from the brink of collapse with his financial wizardry. I opened the financing structure for the project. It had been in trouble, deep trouble. The primary lender had pulled out midway through construction. Caleb had needed $3 million in bridge financing within 48 hours, or the whole project would have gone into receivership. He would have been ruined. I looked at the source of the rescue capital. It came from a limited liability company called Vantage Point Strategic Partners. My heart skipped a beat. Vantage Point. That was the fund Grant had mentioned earlier, the one the Heart Trust was invested in. "Grant," I said, "look at this." Grant leaned in. He traced the transaction path with his finger. Vantage Point put up the $3 million. Grant said, "It was a high-risk injection. They took a silent equity position in exchange for saving the project." "Who authorized the injection?" I asked. Grant pulled up the Vantage Point investor logs from his own secure server. He cross-referenced the dates. The fund managers sent a query to their major limited partners asking for approval on a high-risk allocation. Grant said, "They needed a majority vote from the capital pool." He turned the screen toward me. There was one vote that tipped the scale. One investor who had authorized the use of funds to save Caleb Donnelly's career. L. Heart Trust. Authorized by trustee. I stared at the screen. My mother. "She saved him," I whispered. "He was drowning. He was days away from bankruptcy, and she authorized the investment that saved him." "She didn't just save him," Grant said, his voice filled with awe. "She bought him. That $3 million gave the trust a passive equity stake in Project Skyline. Every time Caleb cashed a rent check from that building, every time he took a profit distribution, 40% of it actually belonged to the Heart Trust." I sat back in my chair. The irony was so heavy it felt like it could crush the table. Caleb had spent 30 years looking down on my mother. He had called her weak. He had called her a dependent. He had treated her like a burden he was gracious enough to carry. But the truth was the exact opposite. For the last 4 years, the great Caleb Donnelly had been an employee of his wife's estate. He was living in a house of cards that she had glued together. He was driving a car paid for by the dividends of her mercy. "He doesn't know," I said. "He has no idea." "No," Grant said, "because the investment was made through the blind trust. He just saw Vantage Point on the paperwork. He thought he was dealing with Wall Street sharks. He didn't know the shark was the woman knitting in the living room." Grant looked at me. "Harper, this changes the strategy. We do not just have a defense against his lawsuit. We have a claim for disgorgement. If he has been underpaying the dividends to the minority shareholders which, knowing Caleb, he has been stealing from the trust for 4 years." He placed a hand on the thick file titled Different Document, Audit Clause. "We can activate the independent audit," Grant said. "We can force a court-appointed forensic accountant to tear Donnelly Ridge Holdings apart to verify the returns on the Skyline project. It will be invasive. It will be humiliating. And it will likely result in criminal charges for fraud if he cooked the books." I looked at the file. This was the nuclear option. If I did this, I wasn't just winning the inheritance. I was destroying his career. I was dismantling his reputation in the town he loved more than his family. A voice in my head, a voice that sounded like the old, scared Harper hesitated. "Is this too much? Is this cruel? He is still the man who raised you. even if he did it badly. Then I remembered the letter. Do not use the money to win. Use it to escape the voice in your head that sounds like him. And I remembered his voice from the recording. My real children will inherit everything. He had tried to erase me. He was currently trying to frame me for elder abuse. He was investigating my life, trying to find dirt to ruin my career. He had declared war. Do it, I said. But keep it sealed. Grant raised an eyebrow. Sealed why? Because I do not want to be him, I said. I do not want to win by humiliating him in the tabloids. I want the court to see the truth. I want the judge to see the numbers. Let the law destroy him, Grant, not the gossip. Understood, Grant said. I will file the motion for a sealed forensic audit this afternoon. The next day, the pressure began to bleed out of the courtroom and into the streets. I ran into Tessa in the lobby of the courthouse during a lunch recess. She looked exhausted. The polished veneer of the perfect daughter was cracking. Her makeup was a little too heavy, hiding dark circles, and she was picking at her cuticles until they bled. She saw me and started to turn away. But then she stopped. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and confusion. Are you happy? She snapped. Dad is selling the lake house to pay the legal retainers. He is talking about liquidating his portfolio. You are bankrupting us. I am not doing anything, Tessa, I said calmly. I am just standing here. Your father is the one spending money to fight a war he already lost. He says you are lying, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. He says you forged Mom's signature. I reached into my bag. I shouldn't have done it. My lawyer would have told me not to. But I wasn't looking at a plaintiff. I was looking at a girl who had been broken by the same man who broke me. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the invoice for Dr. Friedman, the therapist. I am not lying, Tessa, I said. And neither was Mom. I held out the paper. She hesitated, then snatched it from my hand. She read it. I watched her eyes widen as she saw the dates. She saw the amount, $4,000 for crisis intervention sessions. She saw the signature at the bottom, Lydia Hart, trustee. She paid for it, I said softly. When you were 16 and throwing up your dinner because Caleb told you that you looked heavy in your recital dress, Mom paid for the help he refused to give you. She drove you there. She sat in the car and waited. Tessa's hand trembled. Dad said the insurance covered it. He said he pulled strings. Dad lied, I said. He didn't want a paper trail that showed his daughter wasn't perfect. Mom didn't care about perfection. She cared about you staying alive. Tessa stared at the paper. Tears welled up in her eyes, destroying the mascara she had carefully applied. For a moment, she wasn't Caleb's soldier. She was just a daughter realizing she had been mourning the wrong parent. Why didn't she tell me? Tessa whispered. Because she knew you needed to believe your father was a hero. I said, she protected you from the truth about him, even when it cost her your respect. Tessa didn't say anything else. She crumpled the paper in her hand, turned, and walked into the restroom. She didn't come back out for the afternoon session. 2 hours later, Bryce cornered me near the elevators. He didn't look like Tessa. He didn't look conflicted. He looked desperate. Harper, he said, his voice low and hurried. I saw the motion for the audit, the sealed one. Then you know what is coming, I said. Look, we can stop this, he said. He looked around to make sure his father wasn't nearby. I talked to Dad. He is stubborn, but I can work on him. If you drop the audit, if you just let the business records stay buried, we can make a deal. What kind of deal, Bryce? 50-50, he said. You take half the trust. We take half. We drop the lawsuit. We issue a statement saying it was a misunderstanding. You walk away with $10 million. Everyone wins. I looked at him with genuine pity. He didn't care about the truth. He didn't care about what his father had done to our mother. He just wanted to stop the audit because he knew that if Donnelly Ridge went down, his free ride was over. You really don't get it, I said. This isn't a negotiation. Everything is a negotiation, Bryce hissed. Don't be stupid. If you push this audit, Dad will go nuclear. He will burn everything down rather than let you win. Just take the money." "I don't want your permission to take what is mine, Bryce," I said, "and I don't want to save a company that was built on lies." "You are going to regret this," he sneered. "You are just a bitter secretary who got lucky." "I am the majority shareholder," I corrected him, "and you are in my way." The audit proceeded. It took 5 days. The court-appointed forensic accountant was a woman named Ms. Cheng, who had eyes like lasers and a personality like dry ice. She went through the books of Donnelly Ridge Holdings with a fine-tooth comb. On Friday afternoon, she submitted her preliminary report to the judge. We were all in the judge's chambers. Grant, myself, Caleb, his lawyer Lionel Vance, and the accountant, the judge, a stern man with thick eyebrows, read the report in silence. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Caleb was sweating. He kept wiping his palms on his trousers. Finally, the judge looked up. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at Caleb. "Mr. Donnelly," the judge said. His voice was dangerously soft. "This report outlines significant discrepancies in your financial disclosures." Caleb cleared his throat. "Your Honor, business accounting is complex. There may be some clerical errors." "These are not clerical errors," the judge said. He tapped the paper. "This report suggests a systematic pattern of misrepresentation. It appears you have been categorizing personal expenses as business losses to defraud the minority shareholders of the Vantage Point Fund. And more disturbingly, it appears you have been servicing the debt on your personal estate using funds that were contractually obligated to be reinvested in the Skyline project." The judge paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "The plaintiff, Ms. Bell, has requested that this audit remain sealed for the moment. I am inclined to grant that request, but only to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation." Caleb went white. "Investigation. When I see evidence of fraud of this magnitude," the judge said, "I am obligated to refer the matter to the state attorney's office. This is no longer just a probate dispute. Mr. Donnelly, we are looking at criminal liability." Caleb slumped in his chair. The air went out of him. He looked at Lionel Vance. But Vance was staring at the floor, distancing himself from the blast radius. Grant looked at me. His expression was grim. We had found the truth. We had turned the knife. But as I looked at the man who had terrified me for 30 years, now shrinking under the gaze of the law, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cold, final resolution. The story he had told about himself, the story of the great, self-made man, was over. My mother had written the ending 5 years ago, and I had just turned the last page. The mediation room was smaller than the courtroom, and the air inside felt significantly thinner. There was no judge on a raised dais to enforce order, no stenographer to capture the lies, and no gallery to perform for. There was just a circular oak table, a pitcher of lukewarm water, and the 4 of us sitting in a proximity that made my skin crawl. The judge had ordered this mandatory settlement conference as a final off-ramp before the trial went nuclear. He had seen the forensic audit. He knew where this was heading, and I think, in his own way, he was trying to offer Caleb a parachute. Caleb Donnelly did not look like a man who needed a parachute. He sat with his back rigid, his suit jacket buttoned, his hands clasped on the table in a pose of relaxed power. But I knew him. I saw the tightness around his eyes. I saw the way his gaze refused to settle on me for more than a second. He was terrified, but he would rather die than show it. Lionel Vance, his lawyer, opened the proceedings. Vance looked tired. He had read the audit too. He knew his client was standing on a trapdoor. "We are here to find a resolution that keeps this family intact," Vance said, his voice smooth, but lacking its usual courtroom bite. "Mr. Donnelly is prepared to be generous. He recognizes that Harper has certain claims. To avoid the spectacle of a public trial and the potential damage to the Donnelly Ridge brand, we are prepared to offer a structured settlement." Vance slid a piece of paper across the table. Grant Halbrook didn't touch it. He just looked at me. I reached out and pulled the paper closer. The number was written in bold type. $5 million. This is a one-time lump sum payment, Vance explained. Tax-free. In exchange, Harper will renounce her position as trustee, withdraw the request for the forensic audit to be made public, and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding all family financial matters. The remaining assets in the Hart Trust will be dissolved and merged into the general Donnelly estate. I looked at the number. $5 million. It was more money than I could spend in a lifetime. It was freedom. It was a house in the mountains, a new car, a life where I never had to look at a spreadsheet again. Caleb leaned forward. He put on his benevolent father mask, the one he wore when he was about to explain why I couldn't go to summer camp. It is a good offer, Harper, he said. His voice was low, intimate. You are a smart girl. You know how volatile the market is. You know how expensive litigation can be. Take the money. Go live your life. You do not belong in this business. You never did. There it was. You do not belong. I looked at Tessa. She was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. She knew about the therapy payments now. She knew her father had lied to her, but she was still sitting on his side of the table. Old habits die hard. I looked at Bryce. He was watching me with a hungry intensity. He wanted me to take the deal. He wanted the audit to disappear so the cash spigot would turn back on. I slid the paper back across the table. No, I said. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Do not be greedy. $5 million is more than you are worth. It is not about the amount, I said. My voice was calm. I wasn't shaking anymore. I do not want a settlement, Caleb. I want a surrender. Excuse me? Vance interjected. I have a counteroffer. I said, I didn't have a piece of paper. I had it all in my head. Number 1, you withdraw the lawsuit immediately with prejudice. Number 2, you issue a public statement approved by me acknowledging that the Hart Family Trust is valid, that my mother was of sound mind, and that the assets belong solely to the trust. Number 3, you will sign a written apology to Lydia Hart, admitting that you attempted to misappropriate her premarital assets. The room went dead silent. Caleb laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. An apology. You want me to apologize to a dead woman for what? For managing her money better than she ever could. For stealing it, I corrected him. And for lying about it. This is outrageous, Vance said, closing his folder. We are offering a compromise. You are asking for humiliation. Tessa's head snapped up. Her face was flushed with sudden anger. That is what you want, isn't it? You want to embarrass us. You want to see Dad crawl. You want to see us stripped of everything just because you felt left out growing up. I do not want to embarrass you, Tessa, I said. I want to end this. Then take the money, she shouted. Take the $5 million and go away. Why do you have to drag our names through the mud? Why do you have to ruin everything? I am not the one ruining it, I said. But if we go to trial, Tessa, everything comes out. Everything. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Do you understand what everything means? I asked softly. It means the audit becomes public record. It means the world finds out that Donnelly Ridge Holdings is insolvent without my mother's money, but it also means the personal records come out. I looked directly at her. The invoice for Dr. Friedman, I said. The details of your sessions, the eating disorder, the reason you were there. Tessa went pale. I turned to Bryce. And the gambling debts. Bryce, the bookies, the $7,000 Mom paid off so your legs wouldn't get broken. The records show exactly who was paid and why. Bryce flinched as if I had hit him. If we settle on my terms, I said, that stays sealed. The apology is private. The statement is just legal boilerplate. No one has to know about the therapy or the gambling. No one has to know that Caleb Donnelly refused to help his own children while his wife cleaned up his mess. You wouldn't, Bryce whispered. I do not want to. I said, I really don't. That is why I am offering you a way out. Admit the truth about the trust, and I will protect your secrets. But if you force me to defend myself in open court, I will use every piece of evidence I have to prove my mother's competence, and proving her competence means showing exactly how she spent her money saving you two." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed, oblivious to the destruction happening in the room. Bryce turned slowly to look at his father. "You said you handled it," Bryce said. His voice was shaking. "When I got in trouble, you said you fixed it. You told me you paid them off. You made me work at the construction site for a summer to pay you back." Caleb didn't look at his son. He was staring at me with pure hatred. "I did handle it," Caleb snapped. "I managed the household. I managed the accounts." "You didn't pay it," Bryce said, his voice rising. "Mom paid it, and you took credit for it. You made me feel like I owed you my life, and you didn't spend a dime." "She was my wife," Caleb slammed his hand on the table. "Her money was my money. It is all the same pot." "It wasn't the same pot," I said. "That is the point. You used her money to buy their loyalty. You built a statue of yourself using her bricks." "Stop it." Tessa put her hands over her ears. "Just stop it, all of you." "We can stop it right now," I said. "Sign the paper. Caleb, withdraw the suit. Apologize." Caleb stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city he thought he owned. His back was to us, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He was a cornered animal. "I will not apologize," he said. His voice was low, guttural. "Caleb," Vance warned, "consider the exposure." "I will not apologize to her." Caleb turned around. His face was red, his eyes bulging. "She was a guest in my house. She was a liability, and Lydia was a weak, deceptive woman who went behind my back." "She saved your company," Grant said calmly. "The audit proves it." "She destroyed this family," Caleb roared. "She poisoned you against me from the start. She sat there in silence, judging me, plotting this coup. She is the reason my children are looking at me like I am a stranger." "No," I said. I stood up too. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He looked small. He looked like a man made of paper in a rainstorm. "She didn't destroy this family. Caleb, she just stopped letting you define it." I looked at him, and I felt a strange sense of pity. He truly believed his own lies. He truly believed that he was the victim, that his control was love, that his manipulation was leadership. "You can keep your money," I said, "and you can keep your pride, but you cannot keep both. If you walk out of here without signing that apology, we go to trial next week, and when that audit is unsealed, you won't just lose the money. You will lose the only thing you actually care about. You will lose your name." Caleb stared at me. For a moment, I thought he might do it. I thought the self-preservation instinct might override the ego. I saw his eyes dart to Vance, then to Bryce. He saw the doubt in his son's face. He saw the fear in his daughter's. But then, the arrogance snapped back into place. It was a reflexive armor. He couldn't let the guest win. He couldn't let the woman he had silenced have the final word. "I will see you in court," Caleb spat. "And I will destroy you. Come on, kids," he barked at the twins. "We are leaving." Tessa stood up slowly. She looked at me, then at the crumpled tissue in her hand. She didn't look at Caleb. She walked to the door, her head down. Bryce lingered for a second. He looked at his father, then at me. There was no loyalty left in his eyes, only calculation. He realized the ship was sinking, and he was trying to figure out where the lifeboats were, but he followed his father out. He was still too afraid to jump. The door closed behind them. The room was quiet again. I sat back down, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving my limbs heavy. "They didn't sign," I whispered. "I failed." Grant began to pack his briefcase. He didn't look disappointed. He looked like a surgeon who had just confirmed a diagnosis. "You didn't fail." "Harper," Grant said. "You gave them a chance to be decent. They declined. That is not failure. That is clarity." He snapped the locks on his briefcase shut. The sound was loud and final, like a gavel. "Caleb just made the last mistake of his life," Grant said. He looked at me, and for the first time, he smiled a genuine, sharp smile. He thinks he is going to a trial to fight over money. He doesn't realize he just walked into an execution. Grant stood up and offered me a hand. Good, he said. Next session we close the knot. I took his hand. I was ready. The time for negotiation was over. My mother had given them a life raft, and they had just poked a hole in it. Now, all that was left to do was watch them swim. The war did not stay in the courtroom. Caleb Donnelly knew he could not win on the facts, so he decided to burn down the battlefield. 3 days after the mediation failed, the whispers started. It began with the Asheville Civic Council, a charitable board where Caleb had served as treasurer for a decade. They issued a vague but damaging statement about reviewing donor integrity protocols in light of recent allegations regarding the misappropriation of family estates. They did not name me, but they did not have to. In a town the size of Asheville, everyone knew who the estranged stepdaughter was. Caleb was painting a portrait of me as a predator. He was telling anyone who would listen at the country club, at the Rotary meetings, in the checkout line at the grocery store, that I was a bitter, instability-prone woman who had manipulated a dying cancer patient to steal from her own siblings. He played the grieving widower to perfection, his voice catching at just the right moments, shaking his head at the tragedy of greed. It was a smart play. He was trying to make the social cost of my victory so high that I would retreat. He wanted me to be a pariah before the judge even banged the gavel, but then he crossed the line. I was sitting at my desk at Blue Cedar Risk and Compliance, reviewing a routine anti-money laundering audit, when my internal chat pinged. It was the Director of Human Resources. "Harper, please come to my office immediately. Bring your badge." My stomach dropped. In the compliance world, bring your badge is code for pack your box. I walked into the office, my boss, a stern man named David who viewed regulatory adherence as a religion, was sitting next to the HR director. On the desk between them was a printed email. "We received this an hour ago," David said. He didn't offer me a seat. It was sent to the General Ethics Hotline, the Board of Directors, and 3 of our major banking clients. I picked up the paper. The subject line read, "Compliance Risk Harper Bell and the Fraudulent Estate." The email was anonymous, sent from a generic web-based account. It was a masterpiece of half-truths. It alleged that I was currently under investigation for criminal probate fraud, that I had forged financial documents, and that my continued employment at Blue Cedar posed a catastrophic reputational risk to the firm's clients. "This is a lie," I said, my voice steady, though my hands wanted to shake. "I am in a civil dispute over a trust. There are no criminal charges. There is no fraud investigation against me." "The email claims there is a forensic audit regarding theft," David said, peering at me over his glasses. "Is that true?" "There is a forensic audit," I said. "But it is auditing Caleb Donnelly, not me. And it was ordered by the court because he is the one suspected of fraud." David looked at the HR director. "Harper, you know our policy. We cannot have even the appearance of impropriety. If our clients think our own compliance officers are crooked, we are finished. We might have to place you on administrative leave until this is resolved." "If you do that, you are letting him win," I said. "This email is a tactic. It is litigation by other means. If you suspend me, you are validating a smear campaign." I pulled out my phone. "Give me 24 hours. I will prove where this came from." David hesitated. He liked me. I was good at my job. 24 hours, Harper, but stay away from client files." I drove straight to Grant Halbrook's office. I didn't even knock. I threw the email on his desk. "He went after my job," I said. "He is trying to starve me out." Grant read the email. His face darkened. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a personal attack on my livelihood. "He thinks he is clever," Grant said. "He thinks the internet is anonymous." Grant picked up his phone and called the firm's IT security consultant, a guy named Miller who used to work for the Bureau. "Miller, I have a defamatory email sent to Blue Cedar. I need the header analysis, and I need to know if the sender was stupid enough to use a forwarded IP. Yes, rush it." It took Miller 4 hours. Caleb was a dinosaur. He thought that if he created a new email account, it was untraceable. He didn't realize that when he accessed that new account, he did it from the Wi-Fi network at Donnelly Ridge Holdings. And he certainly didn't realize that the anonymous email had been drafted in Word on a computer registered to Caleb Donnelly, CEO, before being pasted into the browser. The metadata in the attachment was screaming his name. "We have him," Grant said, looking at the report. "This is tortious interference with a business contract. It is defamation per se, and since he used his company network to do it, he just dragged Donnelly Ridge even deeper into the mud." We went to court the next morning for an emergency hearing. Grant didn't ask for money. He asked for a restraining order. The judge, the same one who had seen the forensic audit, was not amused. When Grant presented the IT report linking the smear email directly to Caleb's office, the judge's face went rigid. "Mr. Donnelly," the judge said to the empty defense table, Caleb hadn't bothered to show up, sending only a junior associate who looked terrified. "You will convey to your client that if he sends one more email, makes one more phone call, or whispers one more word about Ms. Bell to her employer or anyone else, I will hold him in contempt of court and place him in a cell until the trial concludes. Is that clear?" The order was issued. Grant sent a certified copy to Blue Cedar. My job was safe. But the silence that followed was even more dangerous. Caleb had played his dirty card and lost. Now, he was cornered. That night, the rain returned. It battered the windows of my apartment, washing away the grime of the city but leaving the tension. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I checked the peephole. It was Tessa. She was soaking wet. Her hair was plastered to her face, and she was shivering. She didn't look like the heiress of Donnelly Ridge. She looked like a 16-year-old girl who had been crying for hours. I opened the door. "Tessa." She stood there, hugging herself. "He kicked me out," she whispered. "I asked him about the therapy. I asked him if he really refused to pay for it. He threw a vase against the wall. He told me I was ungrateful. He told me to get out." "Come in," I said. I gave her a towel and made her tea. She sat on my sofa, the same sofa where I had read my mother's letter. She looked around the small apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm. It was safe. "Harper," she said, her voice cracking. Did she really love us? Or was she just doing it to keep Dad happy? Was she just paying the bills to keep the noise down? It was the question that had been eating her alive. She had grown up believing her father was the sun and the moon, and that my mother was just a satellite. Now, the universe was inverting. I walked to my bedroom and opened the small safe in my closet. I took out the box of documents Grant had given me. I found the file labeled Tessa. I didn't show her the invoice this time. I showed her the notebook. It was a small, spiral-bound journal my mother had kept during the years Tessa was sick. "Read this," I said, handing it to her. Tessa opened the book. I watched her eyes scan the pages. October 14th. Tessa ate half a sandwich today. I am so proud of her. I wanted to cry, but I just smiled and told her the bread was fresh. She looked so fragile, like a bird with hollow bones. I hate Caleb for calling her chubby. He is breaking her. I will not let him break her. I will drive her to Dr. Friedman tomorrow. Even if I have to lie and say we are going to the mall, I would drive her to the moon if it would help her see how beautiful she is. Tessa let out a sound that was half sob, half wail. She curled forward, clutching the notebook to her chest. She saw me. Tessa wept. She really saw me. She loved you, Tessa, I said gently. She didn't care that you weren't her blood. She cared that you were hurting. Tessa cried for a long time. When she finally stopped, she looked exhausted. "I can't go back there," she said, "but I can't leave him either. He controls my trust fund. Harper, he controls my car, my credit cards. If I side with you publicly, he will cut me off. I don't know how to be poor. I am scared." It was an honest admission. She was a victim of his financial abuse, just like Mom had been. "You can stay here tonight," I said. "And when this is over, Tessa, You won't have to rely on him. I promise. She slept on my couch, but the next morning, when I woke up, she was gone. She had folded the blanket neatly. She had gone back to the fortress. She wasn't ready to jump yet, but someone else was. At lunch that day, my phone rang. It was Bryce. I heard about the email, Bryce said. He sounded jittery, like he had had too much coffee. Dad is losing it. Harper, he is paranoid. He thinks the walls are bugged. He bugged himself when he used the company server, I said. Listen, Bryce lowered his voice. I can help you. I can testify. I can get on the stand and say that Dad planned this. I can say I heard him talking about hiding the Skyline money. You would testify against your father, I asked. For a price, Bryce said quickly. The settlement offer, the one you turned down. If you guarantee me $2 million from the trust, I will give you everything. I will bury him. I felt a surge of nausea. Tessa had come to me looking for love. Bryce had come to me looking for a payday. He was truly his father's son. I don't need to buy your testimony, Bryce, I said coldly. I have the truth, and I'm not going to pay you to be a traitor. If you want to tell the truth, do it because it is right, not because it pays. You are making a mistake, Bryce hissed. He has one more move. Harper, he is filing a motion today. He is going to void the addendum. Let him try, I said. Goodbye, Bryce. I hung up, but Bryce was right about one thing. Caleb did have one more move. Later that afternoon, Grant called me. He sounded almost giddy. You are not going to believe this, Grant said. Caleb just filed a motion for declaratory judgment to void testamentary instrument on public policy grounds. In English, Grant, he is arguing that the conditional addendum is immoral, Grant explained. He is claiming that a will cannot legally force a man to choose between his inheritance and his freedom of speech. He is arguing that the condition him denying you as his child was a trap that violates the sanctity of the family unit. Can he win that? No, Grant said. But here is the beautiful part. By filing this motion, he has made the trigger event the central issue of the trial. To prove the condition was immoral, the court has to examine exactly what he said and the context in which he said it. Meaning, Grant laughed. He just forced the judge to play that recording in open court. He just handed us the megaphone. He wants to argue morality. We are going to let the whole world hear him say, "My real children will inherit everything," while his wife was barely cold in the ground. He is desperate, I said. He is suicidal, Grant corrected. He is so convinced of his own righteousness that he doesn't see he is walking into a propeller. The court date was set. The final hearing. The judge had cleared his docket. This wasn't just a motion anymore. It was the finale. Grant's voice turned serious. Harper, get some sleep. The next time we walk out of that courthouse, you won't be a guest anymore. You will be the landlord. I looked out the window at the city skyline, at the building where Caleb Donnelly sat in his office, likely shredding papers that were already backed up on a cloud server he didn't understand. I am ready, I said. Good, Grant said, because it is time to untie the knot. The courtroom was not the dramatic arena I had seen in movies. It was a room of heavy oak and fluorescent lights that hummed with a low, irritating buzz. There were no gasps from a packed gallery, no reporters shouting questions from the back benches. There was just the judge, a stern man named Justice Sterling, who looked like he had not smiled since the 1990s, the court reporter, and the four of us, me, Grant, Caleb, and Lionel Vance. Tessa and Bryce were sitting in the row behind their father. They looked like ghosts. Tessa was staring at her hands, her mascara already smudged, while Bryce was vibrating with a nervous energy, his eyes darting between the exit sign and the back of his father's head. Caleb Donnelly stood at the plaintiff's table. He had clearly spent time in front of the mirror that morning. He was wearing a dark, modest suit. His tie was slightly loosened, and his posture was slumped just enough to suggest the weight of a grieving widower. Your Honor, Caleb began, his voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility. I am not here for the money. I am here for the principle. My late wife, Lydia, was a vulnerable woman. She was confused at the end. This document, this so-called addendum, it is a manipulation. It tears apart the very fabric of the family unit. I am simply trying to protect my children and honor the woman I loved. He wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. It was a performance worthy of an award. For a moment, I felt that old familiar panic rising in my throat, the fear that he could charm his way out of anything, that he could rewrite reality just by speaking confidentially. But Justice Sterling was not a country club board member. He was a judge who had spent the last week reviewing forensic accounting reports. "Mr. Donnelly," the judge said. He did not look up from the file in front of him. "You can save the opening statement for a jury. If we ever get there, today is a hearing on the motion for declaratory judgment. Stick to the law." Caleb flinched. He looked at Lionel Vance, who stood up quickly to salvage the moment. "Your Honor, we argue that the activation clause of the trust is contrary to public policy," Vance said. "It effectively punishes a spouse for freedom of expression during a period of mourning. To disinherit a family based on a single sentence spoken in grief is punitive and unconscionable." "Unconscionable." Grant Halbrook stood up. He walked to the center of the room. He didn't look at Caleb. He looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, the estate planning of Lydia Hart was not punitive. It was protective. And the condition was not based on a single sentence. It was based on a specific, verifiable act of disavowal." Grant placed a flash drive on the judge's bench. "We have heard the defense characterize Mr. Donnelly's statement as a slip of the tongue born of sorrow," Grant said. "We would like to play the recording of that moment for the record, so the court can assess the emotional state of the speaker." "Objection," Vance said weakly. "Prejudicial." "Overruled," the judge said. "Play it." Grant nodded to the clerk. The room went silent. Then, through the high-quality speakers mounted on the walls, the sound of rain against a window filled the air. It was followed by the creak of leather, and then, clear as a bell, Caleb's voice cut through the silence. It was not a trembling voice. It was not a sad voice. It was the voice of a man conducting a hostile takeover. "My real children will inherit everything." The sentence hung in the air, cold and absolute. Then came the sounds of the aftermath. Tessa's laugh, Bryce's sigh of relief, and Caleb's aggressive demand. "How much? What is she hiding?" The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I looked at Caleb. His face was a mask of red fury. The grieving widower act had evaporated. "That is out of context," Caleb shouted, forgetting where he was. I was distraught. I had just buried my wife. A man says things he does not mean when he is in pain. "Is that so?" Grant asked. He walked back to his table and picked up a single piece of paper. "Because, Your Honor, we also have an email obtained during discovery. This email was sent from Mr. Donnelly to his personal wealth manager. 3 days before the funeral." Grant handed the paper to the bailiff to give to the judge. "Read the highlighted section, if you would, Your Honor." Justice Sterling adjusted his glasses. He read aloud, his voice flat and monotone. "Regarding the Hart assets once the funeral is over and the stepdaughter is formally excluded from the allocation, move the Hartway capital immediately into the Donnelly Ridge operating account to cover the Skyline shortfall. She will be out of the house by the weekend." The judge lowered the paper. He looked at Caleb over the rim of his glasses. "You planned it," the judge said. "This was not grief. Mr. Donnelly, this was accounting. You intended to disinherit Ms. Bell before the funeral even began. The statement in the lawyer's office was not a slip. It was a confirmation of intent." Caleb opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Vance, but his lawyer was busy stacking papers, physically distancing himself from his client. "The motion to void the addendum is denied," Justice Sterling said. He slammed his gavel, a sharp crack that sounded like a bone breaking. "The Hart family irrevocable trust is valid. The conditional addendum was triggered legally and explicitly by the petitioner's own words. The assets belong to Harper Bell. Your Honor, please. Caleb stepped forward, desperate now. You cannot give her that money. She is incompetent. She will destroy the business that Trust owns 40% of my company. That brings us to the second matter, the judge said. He picked up the thick binder that was the forensic audit. The audit, Caleb went white. I have reviewed the preliminary findings regarding Donnelly Ridge Holdings, the judge said. His voice was icy. Mr. Donnelly, this court finds significant evidence of commingling, self-dealing, and potential fraud against the minority shareholders specifically, the Hart Trust. Those are business decisions, Caleb whispered. Those are crimes, the judge corrected him. I am granting the respondent's request to certify the audit. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent injunction preventing you, Mr. Donnelly, from accessing, moving, or leveraging any assets related to the Hart Trust without the written consent of the trustee, Ms. Bell. The judge leaned forward. And let me be clear, if you attempt to manipulate the books of Donnelly Ridge Holdings to devalue her shares, or if you attempt to hide assets, I will not just fine you. I will dissolve your board of directors and place your company into receivership under court supervision. Do you understand? Caleb nodded. He looked like he was going to be sick. Finally, the judge said, looking at the fee-shifting provision in the trust document. Under the terms of the trust's no contest clause, the cost of this litigation is to be borne by the challenging party. He looked at Vance. Mr. Vance, submit your firm's billable hours to Mr. Donnelly personally. Ms. Bell's legal fees will also be reimbursed by the petitioner. The trust will not pay a single cent for this charade. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged one last time. It was over. For a moment, nobody moved. The reality of what had just happened was settling over the room like dust. Caleb Donnelly had walked in with a team of lawyers and a sense of entitlement. He was walking out with a failing company, a mountain of legal debt, and a fraud investigation hanging over his head. Grant turned to me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. It was a nod of deep, professional respect. It is done, he said softly. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The shaking was gone. I turned to leave. But Caleb blocked my path. He looked terrible. The confident tycoon was gone. In his place was an old, desperate man who realized he had just lost his leverage. Harper, he said. I stopped. I didn't step back. I looked him right in the eye. Harper, wait, he said. His voice was breathless, frantic. Look, we can fix this. The judge, he doesn't understand business. If you enforce that audit, if you squeeze the company, we all lose. Tessa and Bryce, they rely on that income. We are a family. We can work something out. I can bring you on the board. We can be partners. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had made me feel like a guest in my own home for 30 years. The man who had forged my mother's signature. The man who had tried to get me fired from my job. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a deal. He was still trying to negotiate. Behind him, Tessa and Bryce were watching. Tessa was crying silently. Bryce looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. They were finally seeing him for what he was, not a king, but a con artist who had run out of tricks. We are not partners. Caleb, I said. I am your father, he hissed, his temper flaring one last time. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. You owe me. You didn't raise me, I said. You just tolerated me. And the roof over my head, my mother paid for it. She paid for it with her silence, and she paid for it with her money. I am sorry, he blurted out. It sounded clumsy, foreign in his mouth. Okay, is that what you want? I am sorry I said it. I am sorry about the will. Just don't destroy me. I looked at him, and I felt a sudden, profound sense of peace. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. There was just nothing. He was a stranger to me. I am not going to destroy you. Caleb, I said. I don't have to. You did that yourself when you decided that loving money was more important than loving people. I stepped around him. And one more thing, I said, pausing with my hand on the heavy wooden door. You always wanted me to be small. You wanted me to be invisible so you could feel big. Today, the court didn't give me anything new. It just confirmed what my mother knew a long time ago. I was never small. You were just standing on my neck. I pushed the door open. Grant was waiting for me in the hallway. He held out the final document, the acceptance of the trusteeship. "Are you ready to sign?" he asked. I took the pen. I signed my name in blue ink, just like my mother used to. Harper Bell. "I am ready," I said. We walked out of the courthouse and into the afternoon sun. The air was crisp and clean. The rain had stopped. The Blue Ridge Mountains were visible in the distance, a deep, vibrant blue against the sky. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 34 years, the voice in my head, the voice that said I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong, that I was just a guest, was silent. It was finally quiet. And in that silence, I started to walk toward the rest of my life. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from work, from your car, or maybe relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. And don't forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.